I want you to imagine seeing a wild animal in your yard. One powerful enough to rip you apart in seconds. But then you see it again and again. Until one night it feels like it's just feet away, hidden in the dark. So you decide to raise your weapon and you take action. But when it's over, your entire world falls into pieces. What's going on, guys? Welcome back, Midnight Mafia. Thank you guys for tuning in to Mr. E-Files. I got a weird one for you today, and I think it's one of those ones that you're never going to forget. So as of now, it's time to slip into a mind that's not our own. Let's go. In the thick woods of Henderson County, North Carolina, two young couples were trying to carve out their own little paradise, you could say. They didn't live far from civilization technically, but with the trees so dense and the night so silent, it felt like they were the only people on Earth. Jake and Autumn had a small home nestled in the trees. Just a short walk through the woods, maybe about 100 yards, was another cabin where their friends Rachel and Chris lived. And on most nights, they would just hang out at one house or the other, making food, watching movies, talking late into the night. But lately, things had kind of shifted, because there had been rumors going around town. Local Facebook groups were blowing up with sightings of a big cat, a black one, the kind you weren't supposed to see in North Carolina. And Chris had actually spotted it first about a week before. Just after sunset, something large and dark moved across the far edge of his yard. And it was very low to the ground, smooth and silent. At first, he just thought it might have been a trick of the light, but then it turned toward him. Even from 50 feet away, he could see its yellow eyes. And it didn't pounce, it just stared. And then it vanished back into the tree line. And that's when he told Jake about it the next day. "I swear it was a panther," Chris said. "A black one, like the kind people say don't even exist around here anymore." And Jake didn't laugh. In fact, he admitted he'd seen something similar the year before, but he never told anyone because it sounded ridiculous. Still, now they were both uneasy. Jake lived closer to the trailhead and Chris had more of an open yard, but neither one felt safe at night anymore. So they actually started to carry their guns around. Not like slung over the shoulder hunting rifles, just handguns, easy to carry, always within reach, especially at night. And on October 20th, 2021, that night the four of them were all at Jake and Autumn's place. Rachel and Autumn were in the kitchen, laughing as they prepared to dye Rachel's hair, something they'd been putting off for weeks. But Jake and Chris were sitting in the living room, and they were just joking around, half watching movies, half trading stories about the panther and the weird things that they'd seen in the woods over the years. And that's when at some point Rachel shouted from the kitchen, "Chris, I left my headphones at the house. Can you go back and grab them?" Chris kind of paused because he didn't want to go. It was late and the woods were dark. And ever since he'd seen that black shadow thing watching him, he hadn't liked going anywhere near the tree line without sunlight overhead. But it was Rachel asking, his fiance, so how could he say no? And that's when Jake offered, "I'll go with you." So they grabbed their flashlights, clipped their guns onto their belts, and stepped out into the night. And to their surprise, the forest was quiet. Not peaceful, but just quiet. A kind of silence that made every twig snap feel like thunder. The beam from Chris's flashlight bounced ahead of them, catching bits of moss and roots on the trail. Chris was walking fast, and Jake stayed right behind him, scanning the woods like a soldier that was out on patrol. So they reached, at this point, Chris and Rachel's cabin in about 3 minutes. So Chris ducked inside real quick and grabbed the headphones. And then they started to walk back, and they didn't even talk while walking back. No joking, just fast walking. And then they were maybe about 40 feet away from Jake's house when it started. Snap, a branch to their left. They both froze, just standing in place, scanning the area intensely. And then rustling in the woods just beyond the tree line. And then something lower, a growl. Not a loud roar that you might think of, Just enough to hear, enough to imagine wet breath and muscle and claws. So at this point, Chris's heart is racing, and Jake turned, flashlight trembling slightly as he aimed it towards the brush. And that's when both men drew their guns, didn't say a word, they didn't need to. This was it. That thing that they'd been warning each other about, well, here it was, and it was close. And that's when the bush in front of them rustled hard like something was getting ready to leap at them. And that's when they opened fire. Jake fired first. It was 2 quick shots. Chris followed, 3 more in rapid succession. The muzzle flashes lit up the trail like short lightning. The air filled with deafening cracks, and then a scream. Not an animal, not a roar, a human voice. Autumn's voice. Both men froze. They dropped their guns and then ran towards the clearing. And that's when they saw her, Autumn, kneeling next to a collapsed figure on the ground. And that collapsed figure, it was Rachel. She had been crouching behind the bush that had moved. And that growl, well, it was not a growl, it was actually a laugh. You see, she and Autumn had been planning to prank them, just a stupid joke for when they came back. So they ended up finding this carton of expired eggs in Jake's fridge and thought, it would be hilarious to ambush the guys on the trail and pelt them as they walked back in. So they actually had taken off right into the woods just right after the guys had left. And they ended up finding this spot that was right near the end of the trail, and they just waited. But when they heard the guys coming their way, Rachel had shifted to get lower, which ended up snapping the twig. And when Autumn tried to hold back a laugh, it came out as this weird stifled noise, exactly like a low growl. The shaking bush wasn't an animal about to pounce, it was a fiancé trying not to ruin the surprise. And sadly, that surprise had now cost her everything. The 911 call was pure chaos. Screaming, pleading, Jake trying to explain what had happened between sobs. And by the time emergency responders arrived, Rachel, sadly, was gone. And the sheriff's office ruled it as a tragic accident. No charges were filed. The families, as you can imagine, were both devastated. The community was actually heartbroken. The story made local headlines and then quietly faded away. But those who were there obviously will never forget. Jake never carried a gun again. Chris moved out of the woods. He couldn't stay. Autumn didn't speak publicly, not even once. And as for that panther, the one that started it all, well, there were no confirmed sightings after that night at all. But some say the creature was never real. Others say it was, just not in the way that they might have imagined it. Because fear has a way of becoming real, especially when it grows in the dark. When you're convinced that what's out there is worse than what's in front of you. But sometimes what's right in front of you is already more than you can handle. Thank you guys for watching. I know this is kind of a crazy one, but I actually got another one coming up for you right now, so please enjoy that. Okay, I want you to imagine standing at the edge of life, each breath slipping away and knowing that no one is coming to save you. But instead of succumbing to this darkness, you reach deep inside yourself and you actually fight back. This is a story that will make you rethink what it means to survive. Her name? Allison Botha. So Allison always loved Port Elizabeth. Its tranquil coastal beauty felt like home. But on this night, the serenity was replaced with this gripping silence, the kind that sinks deep into your bones. The cool night air carried this eerie weight, a signal that something was terribly wrong. So I want you to imagine that she had just parked her car after spending a peaceful evening with her friends. And the streets were calm out, devoid of any movement. And as Allison got out of her vehicle, she sensed something, like almost that feeling of being watched, that instinctive chill that told her, to hurry up and to move fast. But before she even had the chance, a man appeared right at her side, a figure whose presence would forever change her life. "Get in the car," he commanded, holding a knife against her. So her heart was racing, but her body actually went cold. And the man, later identified as Franz Dutoit, forced her into the driver's seat and made her drive away from everything familiar. And he was calm about it. Far too calm. And as they drove off into the night, Allison's mind just kind of wandered and began to race. She was thinking, why is this happening? And where could we possibly be going? What she didn't know then was that this night would lead her into the abyss of terror. The kind of terror that you can never truly escape. She was about to face something far worse than death itself. So after being forced to drive into this deserted wilderness, another man jumped in the car and joined them. His name was Thunz Kruger, and it was at that moment that their plan became horrifyingly clear. Because Allison's attempts to, talk and even reason with them fell on deaf ears as they drove deeper and deeper into isolation. At this moment, her mind was just a swirling vortex of fear. She was trying to process and get ready for what was about to happen. But absolutely nothing could prepare her for what was about to be the brutal nightmare that followed. So in this remote clearing, far from any signs of life, Franz and Thunz took turns attacking her. They violated her in ways too dark to recount. Their cruelty seriously knowing no bounds. But to them, it wasn't just enough to take her dignity. No. They also wanted to take her life. So what could they possibly have done to her? You might ask yourself, that could be worse than what she's already going through. Well, they stabbed her in the abdomen repeatedly, 30 times to be exact. And then they slashed her throat. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, 16 times. Could you imagine the damage? It was absolutely catastrophic. Her windpipe was nearly severed altogether. Her jugular veins were sliced, and her stomach literally laid open. And the men stood over her, surveying their gruesome work with joy, almost like, hey, look at what we just did. And that's when she remembers one of them saying,
"Do you think she's dead? She has to be, right? Yeah, she has to be."
And with that, they went in the car, closed the door, and they left her for dead. Her lifeless body, which was once so full of life and vibrant, was now just laying there abandoned in the dirt, far from civilization. But if you think that's the end of the story, you have never been so wrong. Because here's where the story actually takes a shocking turn. Despite the overwhelming injuries that would have killed just about everyone else on Earth, Allison wasn't done. Somehow, some way, I don't know how, but from deep inside it must have been, this indescribable strength awakened in her. She was barely conscious at this point, floating in and out of consciousness. But that's when a voice in her head whispered, "If you don't get up right now, you're gonna die." It wasn't just a fight for survival at this point. 30 stabs to the abdomen, 16 throat slices, her insides out. This was a war waged by a will that defied human limits. Okay, so with her throat hanging open and her entrails exposed, Allison managed to move. Slowly, painfully, she crawled toward the road, leaving behind a trail of blood and unimaginable agony. In her mind, the struggle just to stay conscious was immense. And I believe her when she said each second felt like an eternity. But Allison didn't give up. Now imagine this. Not to mention, it's also pitch black out, and every movement that you do causes excruciating pain. She held her head in place with one hand, pressing on her neck to keep the blood, from pouring out, crawling in such a state that would break most people. But Allison's resolve was like iron. And after what felt like hours, she finally reached the side of the road. Just as her vision started fading away, believe it or not, these headlights just pierced through the veil of darkness. And that's when a passing motorist spotted her broken body and immediately, thankfully, rushed to help, and immediately also calling an ambulance. She was absolutely rushed to the hospital like you wouldn't believe. And the surgeons who worked on Allison were stunned that she'd even made it to the hospital alive. The medical team raced against time to repair the severe damage done to her body. And in the days that followed, her survival became something of a miracle. Because after all she went through, Allison was broken, but she was not defeated. And as you could possibly imagine, the recovery was long and it was grueling. But as Allison lay in her hospital bed now, she made a decision. She would not be silenced. She would not be defined by what had been done to her, but rather by how she would overcome it. Just to think if we all had that state of mind. And when she was strong enough, she testified against Franz Dutoit and Thunz Kruger in court. Both men were convicted of assault, attempted murder, the abduction, and they received life sentences without parole. Much deserved, if you ask me. If you ask me, they should be underneath the jail. And in a cruel twist, decades later, the South African Parole Board considered the possibility of releasing Allison's attackers. But thankfully, the public outcry was immediate. I mean, how could men who have committed such an atrocious act ever be allowed just here, go back into society? I mean, this case stirred up deep, deep emotions all across the nation, reigniting debates about justice, rehabilitation, and the rights of victims. What's up, everybody? I am interrupting my own episode because I just learned of some shocking news. Through some deeper digging, I found out that the two men who slit her throat and did all these horrible things were actually released on parole. Can you believe this? But what sets Allison's story apart from so many others is what she did with her second chance at life. Because think about it. Many, and who could blame them, would shrink into the shadows, haunted by their trauma. But not Allison. She became a powerful advocate for survivors of violence. She spoke at international conferences, penned her memoir, I Have Life, and even had her story immortalized in a documentary. And her message was clear the whole time. She said, they tried to kill me, but they couldn't even touch my spirit. Today, Allison Botha remains a beacon of hope for many who have faced the unimaginable. Her attackers may have taken her sense of safety, but they could not take her strength, her dignity, or her future. And every time that now she stands on stage in front of lots of people telling her story, she triumphs over the darkness that once tried to claim her. This is Allison Botha, living proof that sometimes the strongest weapon that we could ever possibly have is the will to survive. Allison's story is a reminder that evil can never fully extinguish the human spirit. Even in the face of overwhelming darkness, there is always light. And you must remember that. Her attackers, thankfully, failed to kill her. Not just in the physical sense, but in every other way that matters. They couldn't break her will to live, her courage to speak out, or her ability to inspire others. This isn't just a story of survival. It's a story of triumph. One that leaves you in awe of the power of human resilience. We are such a special thing, and we're not told that enough. And thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this, please hit that thumbs up. YouTube is throttling our views. I'm talking to people. I'm trying. But let's get this out there as best as we can. You can do that by hitting the like button. That's all you got to do. Share it if you really want. That would absolutely help. But if you want to watch another story and go down the rabbit hole on this one, it's worth it. Trust me. I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.